the Georgia Baptist Mission Board Discipleship Team, led by Scott Sullivan, exists to help churches take the next step toward becoming a healthy, disciple-making church. We've developed tools to help you, like the Watershed Principle, the Spark Conference. Access it today at thesparkconference.com. We're also setting up learning communities across Georgia. Find a community near you at gabaptist.org/discipleship. Now let's join today's broadcast.
Hello, disciple makers. Ray Sullivan and myself are excited to talk to you today. And man, it never fails, guys. As much as I try to not use the word excited because it's so overused, I still go there. And I know I started like every one of these broadcasts that way, but we'll find better words. You know, Ray was a pastor, so he's more eloquent than I am. But elated to join you today with our guest because it is super special, and we've been planning this one a little while out. So Mac Lake is with us on the broadcast today, and for those of you that know Mac, you know that he has a deep passion for volunteers, and we are talking about volunteers today in your church. And so Mac is just a pioneer in the space. There are people that have tried to put some systems together, but over the last 20 years or so, through experience in churches and leadership development, right, Mac, and those kind of things. I think you were in South Carolina. I had down on there, all the way to launching where you're at now. Man, it's just really cool to see that God's done all those things in your life. So tell us, like, first question off the bat. Not planned. In your bio, what's the thing that shocks you most? Like you look back and you're like, man, God did that. That's pretty cool.
Oh, wow. The thing that shocks me most, that's a great question. I think the thing that shocked me most initially was that I planted a church, because I never wanted to be a senior pastor, never dreamed of being a church planter. But then beyond that, the thing that really shocked me the most was that God utilized me to start a church planting network that ultimately that process and system we built was embraced by the North American Mission Board. And I'm just overwhelmed by that on a daily basis to think how God has used that to expand that across North America.
That is such a cool part of your story too. And you know, he's referring to working with NAMB to create a process with that. We're all talking about how Atlanta traffic is the worst just before we hopped on here. And man, what you did with NAMB and, you know, obviously part of the cooperative program, you know, we're funded by that. And we want to thank you for investing in the cooperative program, investing in our pastors. And for those of you watching, you know, the cooperative program is why we get to do this broadcast. And so thank you for supporting us and being a part of that. And so I wanted to start with a few stats and then get us kind of going and kicked off here. You know what? I didn't check in with Ray first. I'm going to check in with Ray. Ray, how's the weather in the Southern Kingdom today?
I've got to tell you, PJ, it's beautiful down south. We've had a lot of rain, had over 5 inches on the blueberry farm this weekend, but man, beautiful today. I'm looking outside. The sun is shining. Squirrels are running across the ground, and gorgeous in the Southern Kingdom.
Yeah, it does sound like a good day. Are gnats out yet, though? Are the gnats?
Not yet.
Okay. All right. Praise the Lord. Then it's the best.
Not yet.
The best part of the season. Well, we so here's some data from today. So we're talking about volunteers. We're talking about the crisis, maybe is the right word to use there, that all of our churches are going through, and we know that most of you watching in Georgia are single staff BIVO pastors. We know that many of you have different contexts and you're unique in that, right? No church is uniquely in the same place as another church. And so every one of those churches has a different culture and a different ethos. And so, but we all struggle with volunteers, but there's been some things that have changed even in that narrative in the last 5 years or so. So the first one, you know, Lifeway put out some research on this and talked about how 1 in 4 Americans volunteer at least once in the past year, you know, so a quarter of America volunteers. So there is this volunteer mindset that's maybe higher than the 10% of people do 90% of the work kind of model. There are more people bought into that. No shocker that women volunteer more than men. I think that we would all see that, but we also know that women are just more prevalent in church in general and statistically speaking. But here's one that I thought was interesting, is that higher education really dictates how much you volunteer, which I actually thought was the opposite, Mac. And so I want you to maybe speak to that here in a minute, because I was kind of shocked to hear the higher the education you have, the more that you volunteer, especially because of our roots as Southern Baptists and that not being the case. And so I'd be interested to know what you think about that. Couple of other quick stats here is the Unstuck group talked about how it's very apparent that as the staffing budget increases, the percentage of people volunteering decreases. And some of us have been in situations like, let's just hire one more associate pastor. Let's hire an admin. Let's hire somebody else to do that. And it does seem like every time you give a little bit of those opportunities away to volunteer, less volunteers get involved. And so that higher that staffing budget, the less volunteers. In fact, bivocational pastors that are watching, we often dream of the day where we can hire somebody else or go full time. But the reality is we have so many volunteers when we're bivocational because we're in it together. And so I thought that was a great statistic. And then two quick more. Christianity Today, right? So post-pandemic, which Ray and I were talking about, we don't really say that anymore. We're kind of like post-pandemic, whatever words, but I'm gonna use it for our purposes. So volunteers have not returned like they have even now, right? So only 35% of Americans are serving now in America, and that's down 44% from pre-pandemic era in the church. And so you just have this mass dropout of people that aren't sure where they're getting in, and we'll talk a little bit about that at one of our points too. So last stat. Okay, I love stats. Mac's like, I just want to get after these. All right, so one last stat. So 61% of people who volunteered in the last 6 months consider volunteering an act of generosity. We're going to get into this with Ray and talk a little bit about, does my volunteering does that count as generosity? Because pastors and people disagree. The people in the pew are saying, man, I volunteer and that's as good as dollars. And the pastor says no. So it's about a 4-to-1 disagreement. Believe it or not, your pastor doesn't feel that way. So before I get to my first question, Mac, anything on those stats? I'll give you first bite at it before I go to the next question.
Oh, wow. Goodness. I love that you put those things out there. I think we have to pay attention to what's going on in culture. And we have to adapt our approach based on what people are saying. And what I see is a lot of churches who are experiencing exactly what you talked about, a decrease in volunteers, but they're using old approaches to try to get people back. And it's not working, and they're frustrated. And I think pastors, staff need to begin to sharpen some of their skills, vision casting skills, communication skills, recruitment skills, emotional intelligence. We need to study the culture better so that we understand where people are at, and be less critical and more adaptive to their thinking so that we can engage them in the mission. It's not that they don't want to be engaged in the mission, it's they want to know that what they're going to give their time and money to feels like it's worth the investment. Is it going to make a difference? And we've got to help them understand that.
Yeah. And so shame is not a motivator. Put it in the chat. All right. Write it down on there. Say shame is not a motivator. Let's quote it here because it really isn't. Just saying that you should volunteer because you should. Okay, it's a true statement, but that didn't really motivate me to do something. And when you're saying strategies, and my next question will be to talk more about the book. But when we talk about strategies, doing a volunteer day where we put out a bunch of sheet of paper and we say sign up wherever you want to, right? We do the fair, we hand out popcorn after church, and we beg you, right? Like Sarah McGlocklin on a commercial, please. Sign up for the children. Please sign up for the orphan. Please sign up. And everybody's got their sheet out there, and that may have worked in a different era, a different way, but that's not really the case. So, Mac, let's jump into it. I would like you to recap the book, The Multiplication Effect. It's an excellent book, and I've also done it on audio on Audible. So, thank you for doing that. Not every author goes that distance, but man, it is well worth it if you're driving around or don't have good cell phone service. You can download it ahead of time. I do that as I'm driving around Georgia. And so I got to listen to it on Audible. So just recap the book for our audience.
Yeah. I would say the book was born out of my own pain. Years ago, I planted a church in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. We were reaching a lot of people. We baptized 60 people in our first 3 months. And I recognized, wow, I've got a problem here. I've got all these new believers, but I don't have enough leaders to disciple these new believers. And so that became a real challenge. And I remember saying, hey, we've got a leadership problem in the church. We got a leadership problem in the church. Then I woke up one day and realized I was wrong. We don't have a leadership problem in the church. We have a leadership development problem in the church. So that led me to really dive in and begin to study the life of Christ to see how did Jesus develop these 12 men that went out and changed the world. So just begin to study that process and put together a framework. So multiplication effect is really about a framework to help you build an intentional leadership development strategy that will ultimately end in a leadership development culture. And when I say leadership development, I am talking about discipleship. I look at them almost one and the same. And so what the book does, it helps you put together, it's not a program, it's a framework. And so it helps you, it shows you how to put together a structure that will help you disciple people to different levels of spiritual maturity. It helps you put together an onboarding and training system, helps you identify specific competencies that leaders need to be discipled in order for them to have a true impact with their life. And then it helps you identify who are the right people that we need to train, who are the people we need to identify to get them reproducing themselves as leaders. And so when you put all of that together, it works together to build a leadership development culture in the church. When I talk to pastors and I ask them, what's your leadership development strategy? I get one of two answers. They tell me, hey, I don't have a leadership development strategy, or mine's organic, which means they don't have leadership development strategy. So the book is designed to help them build that out.
Gosh, and it is a huge correlation to discipleship, because a big part of the structure is mentoring, getting to know somebody, helping train them. And we've heard phrases in the past like work yourself out of a job, but that's really not what this concept is. Work yourself out of a job is like, I don't want to do this one day. Right. The system, the pipelines, the structure that we're talking about is what's your next step as a volunteer? That was my biggest takeaway from the book, is that as a volunteer, sometimes you get stuck and you're not sure what they need to do next. And I think we addressed that a little bit later on, so I'll hold it there. But let me ask one quick follow-up question, which is, so pastors watching now, it's like, I've already bought the book on Amazon, it's on the way. What's the first step they need to do after this? Now I know there's an issue. Okay, I need to do volunteers. Normally that first step's the hardest. So what would you encourage a pastor watching to do?
Yeah, oddly enough, it begins with your structure. You have to structure for development. Most churches structure for function. How are we going to function? What I help churches do is I help them structure for development, so that when you build the leadership pipeline, and again, I call this the generic leadership pipeline. It begins with, this is the biggest pool of your people. It's those who lead themselves. It's from that pool of people, they flow up to the next level of the pipeline. They become leaders of others. So they become a small group leader, a children's leader, a guest service leader. From that pool of people, you have another level, and it's called leading leaders. And this is where you have like a nursery coordinator, preschool coordinator, or a small group coach, something like that. Then those flow up and lead a department. That becomes the individual that's leading your student ministry, your children's ministry, your groups ministry, your worship ministry. And from there, those flow up to lead the organization. And so that's the senior pastor, or like an executive pastor in a larger church. And so typically most churches have 5 levels of a leadership pipeline. And so it's identifying that structure. And that is so important, because what it does, it helps you identify and helps that individual identify what their next step is in their spiritual development as a leader. And most churches don't have that. They go from, okay, I'm serving in the church. Oh, you need to hire a part-time youth guy. Okay, I'll move you into that. And they're jumping levels of the leadership pipeline, and that undermines their development. And then we get frustrated because here you've waited for years as a pastor to hire somebody. You get the chance to hire somebody, you put them over area ministry, and they don't act like a leader, they act like a doer. And so they're not leading the ministry, they're doing the ministry. Therefore, you your church or that area ministry doesn't grow because you put somebody in who does not have the progressive levels of development that the leadership pipeline helps provide.
Yeah, and that leadership cap is big, right, Ray?
Yes.
And you've seen that firsthand, where people, their capacity can cap an entire ministry and can keep you from moving forward. And again, not about numbers, right? But it is about people, and it's about loving people, and we got more sinners than we can deal with. And so we're trying to reach as many people as possible. But Ray, go ahead. What you got?
Yeah, I think I'm still hung up on the Sarah McGlocklin image of us begging people to serve. Wow. But anyway, sorry, Mac. We get derailed sometimes.
We do. Sorry about that. Super Bowl.
Yeah, what an image of what we try to do to convince people to volunteer. And I Mac, I love what you're saying, and I'm fascinated because 31 years as a senior pastor, we talk about service, and we're trying to get people plugged into service because we believe that as Christians, we need to be serving. But the issue is not serving. The issue is disciple making. The issue is being a disciple. And so leadership is not just developing leaders, it's developing disciples who make disciples. And when we go to Ephesians, we see that the role of the pastor is to lead leaders. It is to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. And the work of the ministry is not just the information transfer. I have to have people that will give information. I have to have people that will babysit children. I have to have people that will serve the nursery. No, it's the equipping the saints is to make disciples who will use their gifts and abilities in those areas in leadership to make disciples. And so, man, I'm fascinated. I love that. Thank you for equating leadership development with discipleship, because I really did not know that early on. I didn't see it that way. Through a lot of failure on my part of not developing leaders, I look back at it now and I see that I was just kind of shooting at the wrong target. So let me ask you this, and PJ had mentioned earlier, and I want to focus in on this because at the Georgia Baptist Mission Board, 88% of our churches run less than 250 people. So we talk about staffing, we talk about hiring people, and the bottom line is a lot of our guys, that's not even on the radar.
Right.
So they're trying to, mow the yard, clean the toilets, lead the music, get the choir ready, prepare the sermon. And now we're talking about, hey, you have to have a leadership pipeline. So how does your model, Max, scale? What would you say right now to those guys that are sitting here saying, okay, I get this, and I hear about church planning and large churches and multi-staff, but man, mine is organic because I don't know how to scale this down to what I'm dealing with at Dirt Road Baptist Church. What's it look like?
Yeah, first of all, I grew up in Dirt Road Baptist Church.
Yeah, man.
I grew up in a little church of 70 in Hanley, West Virginia, and loved that church. And that church transformed my life. And I love your question, because most people, when they hear the word leadership pipeline, they think large church.
Right.
Oh, that's for large churches. And, I want to scream and go, no, you don't get it. I would much rather work with a smaller church through this process than a larger church, because they can execute it faster and easier. I want to refer back to the passage you just talked about, Ephesians 4:11 and 12. That was one of the primary verses that impacted my life around leadership development. And I was reading it one morning, and the Holy Spirit just grabbed me and said, Mac, pay attention to this. And I went, no, God, I know this. I know this. My job is to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. And the Holy Spirit was like, no, you're missing it. You're missing it. I went back and looked at it. And it was like, okay, he's given apostles and prophets and pastors and teachers and evangelists to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, Ray. Here's my paraphrase of the verse. He has given leaders to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry.
Yes.
Those 5 positions were not paid staff in the local church. They were volunteer leaders. So he had, so if you're a single church, single staff church, guess what? It doesn't matter. He has given your leaders are supposed to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. That's not just your job.
That's right.
It's your leader's job. And you begin to mobilize them. Now, for a smaller church, and I on my YouTube channel, YouTube /Mac Lake, there is a video I did because a guy reached out to me. He has a church of 50. And he said, all right, does Leadership Pipeline apply to me? I said, absolutely, yes. So I did a 12-minute video and built a pipeline for him, laid it all out exactly what it would look like for him. And that's on my YouTube channel. And I can give you guys a link to that.
Yeah.
That's
but
perfect.
If we look at what Jesus did, okay, and I've studied Life of Christ in chronological order quite a bit. He began his public ministry in the fall of 26 AD. And I want to show you 5 strategic moves. When he first met Peter, John, Andrew, Nathaniel, and Philip, he said to Peter and John, or to Andrew and John, they said, where are you staying? He said, come and see. All right, that was an invitation. They were curious. That was an invitation to, hey, get to know me a little bit. All right, that was in the fall of 26 AD. In the fall of 27 AD is the second strategic move. That's when he looks at Peter, James, Andrew, and John, said, follow me. 1 year later, he invites them into an official discipleship relationship, which was still not leadership. All right. And then 9 months later, in the summer of 28 AD, Jesus goes up on a mountain. He prays all night long. And then he comes down the base of the mountain, and and Luke says he calls his disciples to himself. How many? We don't know. Could have been hundreds, because it was the height of his popularity at this point in his public ministry. He spent the night praying. That Greek word means to pray without ceasing all night long. Why did he do that? Because he was getting ready to make the most strategic decision in his public ministry at this point. He was going to choose 12 key leaders. So that was his third strategic move. He chose 12 to be apostles. 9 months later, in the winter of 29 AD, he makes another strategic move. After training those 12, he did an intense 6 months of training with them. And then in the winter of 29, he looks at them and he says, now, I need you to pray the Lord of the harvest that he will send forth workers. Right. In other words, he's telling them, I want you to recruit the next generation of leaders. All right. And they do that over that next year. They do that. And then the final strategic move, he says, go make disciples of all nations. In other words, become movement makers. That's 5 strategic moves, development moves that Jesus moved those 12 through that help them become world-changing leaders. Leadership Pipeline is the same thing. I want somebody in my church, I want them serving on a team or in a group. And then I want to move some of those, not all of them, some of those to leaders. Some of those leaders, and this is so important, especially in smaller churches, I want to move some of those leaders up to leader of leaders, like a coach. And then some of those I want to move up to oversee a ministry area. So let me give you a real practical, simple example. When I planted my church, we said we're going to be a church of 300. Okay. And now we knew we weren't going to be 300 right away. That was our goal, to grow to that. So we launched and we settled down around 150. Okay. But I said, I want to set a structure for 300. You could set a structure for 200. It doesn't matter what, but what do we want to grow towards? And let's structure for what we're growing towards. So here's what we did. We knew, okay, if we had 300, that means we're going to have 60 children. If you have 60 children, if you use appropriate ratios and you do an every other week rotation, you need 12 volunteers or team members. You need 12 leaders on a rotation. You need a preschool coach, an elementary coach. You need a children's director. All right. That is, I think that's 27 positions I would need for a children's ministry of a church of 300. We knew that before we launched on day one. And we had that for every single ministry. So what's the starting point? It's putting a structure together so you know where you need people and where you need to develop people to.
That is so good, Mac. And I, going back to where we began this whole thing, that leadership pipeline, leadership development is discipleship. And when I was listening to you talking about, the chronology of Jesus's ministry, I'm thinking of Dan Spader, and I'm thinking of Sun Life, and the 4 chairs. And basically he's talking about the 4 chairs of discipleship and moving people in that process. But really what it is, it's the 4 chairs of leadership. It's raising people up to lead. And so let me just ask you this here, one nugget, give me one nugget for that single staff pastor right now. So he's listening and he's leaning in and he's like, okay, Mac has spent a lot of time thinking about this. I've tried the Sarah McGlocklin approach. I've tried begging. I've tried sign-up sheets. Hey, man, where do I begin right now? Give me one thing to help me begin to think about where do I go? What's my next step?
Yeah, I mean, just to put it in real practical terms, and I agree with Sarah McGlocklin thing. It's like, I tell people, it's like waving a white flag.
Yeah.
Hey, we need help in children's ministry. It's like waving a white flag and saying, come join my sinking ship. We don't want to do that. We want to inspire people. And so if I was pastoring a church of, let's say, 50 to 60 people, one of the things, and just to make real practical terms, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to identify who are my 4 top leaders that I can get overseeing key areas of ministry: children's, worship, Sunday school or groups, adult discipleship, whatever that is, maybe guest services or missions, something like that. I'm going to identify those 4 or 5 people. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin, just like Jesus did, I'm going to begin to spend a disproportionate amount of time with those few in order to impact the many. Now, and I've done this in a small church. And so what I've done it in a small church, I've done it in a church plant, where I picked 7 people over 7 key ministries. I put them over those ministries. I explained to them, I said, listen, I need you to lead this area ministry. Under the umbrella of the overall vision, I need you to lead this area ministry. My job is to make you successful. Your job is to make the leaders under you successful. I will commit myself to developing you. And the other commitment I'm going to make, I will not undermine your authority. So if anybody in the church comes to me and says, hey, Mac, can you help me with this? Hey, Mac, can you get me the curriculum? Hey, Mac, I got a problem in my Sunday school class. Hey, Mac, I'm not sure what to do with this issue in my area ministry. I will not become the solution man. I won't be the answer man. I will point them back to you because I've empowered you to do that. Now, the thing I'm going to do is I'm going to empower them and I'm going to train them. When Jesus chose his 12, and we don't have time to go into it, but if you look at the next 6 months of what he did, it was intense training. So what I would do is, if I was that pastor, I've written a book series called the Discipling Leaders Series. It matches the leadership pipeline: lead others, lead leaders, lead department, lead the organization. I would grab those 4 leaders. I would start at the bottom and I would just say, hey, I'm going to disciple you through the book Leading Others. And when we finish that, I'm going to disciple you through leading leaders. And when we finish that, I'm going to disciple you through leading a department. And I would just begin to teach them the competencies and disciple them in those competencies provided for you in that book. You just meet with them every 2 weeks and you have a conversation about what God's doing in their life and how they're growing in that area and how they're applying it as a leader at home, at work, and in the church. One of the big problems with leadership development in the church today, we have settled on teaching people how to turn a ministry widget versus living a biblical lifestyle of leadership.
That's it.
And pastors, if you want to start a movement in your city, in your town, in your church, you begin to train people to live a biblical lifestyle of leadership instead of just turning your little ministry widget. People are not going to volunteer their time to turn a ministry widget anymore. They value what adds value to them. And they feel like they want to give their life. COVID taught us that life is special, that family's special, and how we use our time is special. And doggone it, I hear volunteers tell me all the time, don't waste my time. Don't waste my time with leadership development if it's not going to be good. Teach me to live a biblical lifestyle of leadership. That will make a difference. And these books are designed to help you disciple people in a way that they have an impact in their home, at work, and at church.
So PJ, I think we need an invitation right here.
I mean, I was just thinking, Ray, like the reason I'm standing up today is because I got to jump, man. Like I'm ready to go. Like this.
I was just like, preach. But But just, hey guys watching today, just listen to that right there. You may want to just stop right now, rewind that, because that's the one thing that I wish I would have learned a long time ago. And I think so much, and I hear this so often talking with pastors every day. I just don't have leaders for preschool. I don't have leaders for this area. I don't people that have the experience. Your role is not to raise up leaders for those departments per se. Your role is to disciple people. And as you begin to disciple them, as you begin to pour into them, you're going to have to spend time with them. And I know as a pastor, one of the things that I was kind of taught early on is you can't single people out. You have to be equal to everybody, and you can't spend more time with certain people than others. Guys, that's just not biblical. Jesus sought those key leaders, and he invested in them, and then he sent them out to disciple others. And so it doesn't matter what size church that you're leading. There are 3 or 4 people that God has put there. He says, I want you to pour into them, and I want you to raise them up, invest them. And that doesn't matter if you're a mega church in downtown Atlanta or if you're Dirt Road Baptist Church. So that's where we start. Who are those key leaders that God has put in front of you right now to pour into?
And Ray, I love that challenge. And one of the things, another shift we have to make in our mindset is when I am discipling somebody, it's not just about their character. It's about their competence. It's both. And I want to teach people. Yes, I want to teach people and disciple people to live like Jesus. But once I get them to the point where they're living like Jesus on a consistent basis, let's teach them to lead like Jesus.
Yeah, right.
That's where our discipleship efforts fall short. We don't teach them to lead like Jesus. We just keep working on their character and character and character. Yeah. And I told a staff member one day, she said, Mac, I'm doing this stuff. I took them through this Beth Moore study and this Beth Moore study and this, Priscilla Shriver study. But I said, that's great. You got some godly women that don't know how to lead their way out of a paper bag, because all you're doing is teaching them character. You're not teaching them how to lead. And Jesus taught his disciples how to lead.
The character and the conduct, the priorities of Jesus.
I'm tweeting right now. Mac Lake said WMU can't lead themselves out of it. All right, so we'll see what
it was not a Baptist church that I was talking about.
Okay. So I want to give a couple shout outs to some pastors. Our team really wants some of these guys to just know that we see them and they're doing great. The first one is in Ray's region, was my region, which is Alan Sanders. Alan, during COVID, ran a church of 12 and his family's 5, right? And he's just like, where do I go from here? And it's just one. And now that church is, over 30, sometimes 40, and just growing and not a growing town. I mean, he's just loving people one person at a time, and he's building that pipeline. So even when it's 10 people, which is just a Bible study, you can say, well, I need these roles to get to 100, but you know what? I start with 2. Like, it's okay to say that we're going to start with 2 people and do it. So Alan, he's been doing that at a great job. The second person is Drew's startup. Drew has a church up here in Calhoun, not far from me, and Bucky's, for those of you that need another identifier in North Georgia. And so Drew, held a volunteer appreciation banquet, right? He's trying to build culture with his volunteers to say that what you're doing matters, and there's more that's out there, and sometimes that's the next step that you can do that. And so Drew and Meadowdale have been fantastic. They're really turning that around. And he asked me one day, I need a student guy, can't pay much, looking for somebody that wants to sign up for a challenge. Know anybody? And I'm like, man, I'll send you anybody. It's great, right? But he's building a volunteer pipeline because we just don't always have those dollars to hire out. And I'm not sure that's the way that we should always go. So we're going to have to do this one a little bit more lightning to keep us on time. So Ray, real quick, how do we increase volunteer opportunities in our churches?
Lightning is tough on this one, but let me just
say,
let's go back to what Max said early on when he talked about a leadership development culture. And I think we talk a lot about this language, expectations, the way we present our church from the very beginning. And I think a lot of that, it just goes back to the very beginning of letting people know that we are a disciple-making church, and part of disciple-making is going to be serving. And it's not just about we want to plug you into a position. We want to have you serving in a department because we need you. We want to develop you. We want to lead you to be a disciple maker. You will do that in the church, but you'll also do that in the community. So I think just beginning with that whole cultural understanding in your church, speaking the language from the pulpit, and then pastor, you leading that. The church seeing you investing in people, seeing you pouring into leading leaders. I think trickles from the pulpit down. It's not just in the preaching aspect, but it's in your personal investment in the life of people. So lightning round, I would just say kind of start there.
That's about as lightning as a pastor will get, Mac. So that's the best we can do for him. But no, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. All right, what do you think? How do you create volunteer opportunities? I know you're gonna say structure and those kind of things, but how do people know about those opportunities?
Yeah, it's shoulder tapping. It's having I see in you conversations. Nothing wrong with doing the Sunday morning volunteer, sign up type of thing, but people are more likely to sign up and volunteer when you go over and you look them in the eye and say, "Hi, I've been watching you for a while. And can I tell you what I see in you?" It's called an I see in you conversation. And can I tell you what I see in you? Yeah. I just see this faithfulness. I see people following you. I see a passion in you. I see a calling in you. We've got to start talking about calling again. I think we've gotten away from that and begin to call out the called again. I grew up in a little country church, and every Sunday you were called, you felt, oh no, God's calling me to go to Africa. I was a little kid scared I was going to have to go to Africa because our pastor was always calling out the called, we got to get back to that and look at people. We got to stop making excuses for people. I was talking to a lady recently. I can't get enough children's volunteers. I said, how many people have you asked in the past 30 days? Oh, I don't know, quite a few. I said, well, how many? Oh, I'm not sure. I said, well, give me some names. Well, and she couldn't do it. And I realized she's given up. She's waiting for people to come to her instead of her scanning. And one of the exercises I have churches do when I take them through the leadership pipeline process, once a quarter, you put the names of everybody in your leadership pipeline, where they're at. You look at those names and you identify who has potential to go to the next level, who needs to grow, who's not on this chart that needs to be on this chart. And PJ, I've had churches who've gone through this process who literally on a wall in their office put every single person's name that's serving and at what level of the pipeline. And I have one church that put 3x5 cards that were blank with the name of the position, and they had their pipeline on this side and prayer request on this side. And if they needed 3 small group leaders, they had 3 blank cards. They were praying for the people there. And then that reminded their team, let's go out and look. Let's go out and look and have those I see in you conversations. Tell people what you see in them and why you think they would be great for this role. And then cast a vision of what God's doing in your area of ministry and the difference their gift can make in that area of ministry and the lives of people.
Yeah, and
let me shout out one here. So Chris Roberts, my pastor at Bridge Church down in Blackshear. One of the things that has always impressed me about Chris is he can sit there and he can tell you where his membership is on this process. And we have had these conversations. He's like, I've got this many leaders here. I've got this many leaders here. I've got this many leaders here. And that is just amazing to me that he knows where his people are. And then he's always thinking about what is the next step to get them to the next place. Yeah. And that's not a huge church, but it is a disciple making church and it is a sending church. And it is just important for you, pastor, to think, where are my people? Who are they? And those, I love that I see in you conversations.
I tell you what, a football coach would be fired if they couldn't tell you how many players had offense, how many they had on defense, who the backups were, how deep they would be fired. And yet we never look at that. And so, like I said, I tell churches, let's put the names on every quarter. Let's look at those names. And here's one of the things I point out to them. I say, how many of you get a budget report in your inbox every month? Everybody gets a budget report. How much money came in, how much went out, how much got left, right? That's very important to do. That's a good discipline. Then I ask the question, how many of you get a people report on your desk at least once a quarter? Nobody ever raises their hand. If we managed our money the way we managed our people in the church, we'd go bankrupt.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah. Well, and I'm gonna land the plane here and just share a little bit about my story because I think it's relevant to that comment. Lifeway research tells us that 4 out of 10 people will seek you out, so the majority of people won't. So 60% of our people aren't just going to walk up and say they're ready to volunteer. We're going to have to tap them on the shoulders. We're going to have to talk to them, and we have to make it easy for them to connect. So I find myself in my last church before I came here at the mission board, and I get hired in as the IT director, and I get to do volunteer management. You'd be like, man, what's the nerd got to do with that, right? So some of our viewers know I'm kind of quirky. I have degrees in singles ministry and discipleship, and it's kind of eclectic in how the Lord used me. And so what I got is a unique front row seat to what you're talking about, Mac, which is I knew that software could help us get there. And so we deployed a new software at our church. We were in about 2,000 on Sunday morning. And so it was a larger church, and I was brought in to kind of do this project. And so one of the things that came up was volunteers. And in that session, I was just like, we have to be laser focused on knowing where everybody volunteers because of burnout. Miss Patty serves in 7 different places. And you know what happens? She leaves and goes to another church when she's burned out. Yep. We were finding that we had student volunteers that signed up for 5-8 years tour duty. And at the end of it, they were like, we're done. We're going to a different church. They were falling out because we were just exhausting them. And so we thought, we just need to name the position. Something as basic as that turned into a volunteer role. And we dared to be people centric. Like when we started out, we called it the white glove experience. Like we wanted you to have the best experience if you wanted to connect and take your next step. And so sometimes we'd ask people to do that. Sometimes we do the call, fill out this form, that kind of thing. And we had a coaching process, all volunteers. And I think y'all have picked up, I had lots of hats, right? So this wasn't my full-time gig. And so I had to work with volunteers. And so we had volunteer coaches that would meet with you after you said you had your next step. They were a neutral party. And Judy was one of my best volunteer coaches. And what Judy would do is she'd meet with you and we'd fill out a little form. Not you fill it out, but I fill it out. Tell me a little bit about your testimony. What's your address? What's your this? Like, let me love you and let me get to know you. And what are you passionate about? What has God called you to? And so we stopped the children's person begging, the student person begging, and we stopped that cycle and culture and said, no, let's be about the person. And we had more people sign up. We had happier volunteers in those systems, and it was more sustainable. Y'all, like you could do this at any size church, like just having a volunteer coach, whatever you want to call them, that just loves people. And they say, well, I work on Sundays. I do this, I do that, I do that. Well, this might be your role. Like you might be able to help people find their next step in volunteering and get them in there. And then there's also the ugly side of volunteers, which is conflict mediation. And so we would get into some of those situations where this volunteer wasn't a good fit. Well, instead of saying you're no longer welcome in our church, we'd find their next step. Oh yeah, you're right. You're not right for student ministry. I know they begged you to come over there, but why don't you come over here to the singles ministry and you can help us? Oh, it was a great fit. And so I guess what I'm getting at is that if you're intentional about people, and you said this early on this one, you're going to hit the mark. And when you're about running a program or even a system or saying, hey, this framework has to work this way or else, you're not thinking about the person sitting in front of you that loves God and just wants to fulfill their calling in their life. And so the easier we can make that on ramp, the more clear we can make it for them to volunteer, the more they're able to move forward. Now, what I didn't have as a volunteer minister, Mac, is the idea that the role you're in now isn't your destination. So where I fell short of this is once I got you there, I really did feel like we did our job. And to your point, it's like, that's not the point. That's not discipleship. And so, Ray, like when you're, I just have to confess on this broadcast, I didn't see it as discipleship. I saw it as filling roles and almost like a job placement system. Then I did a discipleship model where, you would work at the door, but then you'd go here and then you would go here and we would say that we would do that, but we didn't, right? We had to do that. So I guess my last little thing and Ray, you might want to, I think Ray's got one more question for you, but I guess Mac, you don't know what you don't know. And so some of us are kind of like blown away in this moment. Like even I'm blown away at like what I did in the past. And I thought I was doing pretty good. And I'm like, no, that wasn't. So the intentionality you've brought up a few times, cards on the wall, different things how do you keep a team moving forward? So this isn't just like a 6-month fun journey.
Yeah, great question. So When I take them through the process, one thing I tell them is, please, once we build out your intentional leadership development strategy, please do not announce it to the church. Because the day you announce it to the church, it becomes a program and it dies.
So true.
This is a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. The framework is, so if, as you're looking at me right now, I have a skeletal structure and I have internal systems that make my body run in a healthy way. You don't see those. And just like in the leadership pipeline, we've got structure, system, content, people. You don't see that. That's the framework. That's the structure and system. What I tell churches, let's put skin on it. This is a lifestyle, not a program. It's a disciple-making lifestyle where you're engaging and interacting with a small group of people to help them learn to live and lead like Jesus. And so that's one thing I tell them. Then the second thing I tell them is you do a quarterly leadership development, leadership pipeline meeting where you look at, okay, where are people at? And let's keep our eye on that. And so that quarterly leadership development meeting helps. And then once a month is you take your onboarding system and that you are utilizing, and I help them build that out in the book. There's samples and help you build that out. Once a month, you pull the onboarding system out in a team meeting with your key leaders. And if I'm a single staff person, I still got my key leaders I want to get around me and say, okay, who are you recruiting? Where are they at in this process? How's it going? So that way we're not getting Miss Susie in 5, 6 different positions and burning her out and overutilizing her. We're making sure Miss Susie has a primary ministry and a secondary ministry if she wants that. And we're maximizing the time that she is giving to the church. And we're maximizing how we care for her and how we develop her. And so that little rhythm, number one, no, it's a lifestyle, not a program. Number two, do a quarterly leadership pipeline meeting where you look at all the names of people. And number three, a monthly, each month, look at your onboarding system. Who are we onboarding? Where are they at in the process? Are we giving them the white glove treatment as we're onboarding them? And that will help keep this maintain and sustain forward.
Thank you, Matt. I mean, there's so much stuff in this broadcast, and I know we've gone a little bit longer today than we normally do, but man, this is the topic that I probably get the most from pastors is, man, help me. I need leaders. And I'll say all the time, well, you need disciples, and so we're addressing that. But let me just, as we finish up, I'm curious. So what was it like helping NAMB? I know you worked with NAMB for a while, and then the Multiply group, what are you guys up to? How are things going post-pandemic now?
Yeah, working with NAMB was one of the greatest honors of my life. I had built a church plan assessment and training, and they identified that. They liked it. So Brian Bloy, the pastor at Westridge Church, and I, who were running that whole thing, gave that over to the North American Mission Board. And so I went to work for them to help install that in the Sin Cities. One of the greatest joys of my life is watching that go beyond Sin Cities now, and states are adopting that full process. And that has been so exciting to watch that and to watch it just spread. And here's the big lesson I've learned is when you make leadership development, because that really is part of a leadership development process. When you make leadership development intentional, you can make it reproducible. When it's reproducible, it's unstoppable. Mm-hmm. So I get calls today or emails today from church planters who were trained from a trainer that I've never met, that was trained by a master trainer that I've never met. And that just tickles my heart. So it was a great joy being a part of that mission. But I did leave there because Leadership Pipeline is my greater passion. And I was being pulled between the two because both were growing. And so I had a great team at NAMB. So I developed and raised up. I turned everything over to them. And I went and started my own company called Multiply Group. 2020 just about ruined us. Yeah. And but I'm so thankful because it was during 2020 I wrote the Discipling Leaders book series. Mm-hmm. So and some other books that resources to help churches develop leaders. And so, and then also during COVID, I created the Leadership Pipeline e-course. So now we can deliver this for churches at a much more affordable rate virtually than we ever could have before. And then we've also just kicked off something called the Leadership Accelerator. It's a brand new program. It's churches and pastors struggle with how to lead a team effectively, how to help that team get really high quality results. And I've been doing this for years. And so what it does, the Leadership Accelerator's 8 components along with the tools that they can use to have high relationship, high result teams. And we just started delivering it, and the results we're getting back have just been phenomenal. So we're very excited about introducing that over this next year out there as well.
That may be another broadcast, PJ.
I know. I was just thinking, where are we going to have Mac back, to talk about these? And so I think we will. And, tell us about the websites. How can we get a hold of you?
Yeah, multiplygroup.org. multiplygroup.org, and you can go there, see different services we offer, our resources. If you want to talk more about Leadership Pipeline, just click that button, or Leadership Accelerator, click the Explore button, and we'll set up an Explore call where me or one of my team members will meet with you, help diagnose where you're at, help you identify next step, and show you how we might be able to help you.
Oh, I love it. And so, Ray, thanks for being on the broadcast today with me, buddy. I always love getting to do these with you. And, we exist to serve churches in Georgia. And so whatever we can do as a disciple making team to help you work on that volunteer pipeline, whatever those next steps are, man, we love connecting you to resources like Mac and just getting these experts in the room and learning. And that's what we just did. We were just learning. It was like a little clinic there. And so we're here as a team to help you. We thank you for giving to the cooperative program so that we get to be able to do this every day. And thank you to Lana. She's hiding in the background, never has her video on, but is our show producer and mildly terrified of videos and recording, and that it's going to go wrong. But Lana, it never does. You do a great job, and we appreciate you. So thank you, Disciple Makers, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks for listening. We want to continue the conversation from today's broadcast in a learning community near you. These learning communities are designed to celebrate your biggest wins, resource your greatest need, and help you finish well. We also want to give you a free gift, the 5 discipleship shifts most churches need to make to produce world-impacting disciple makers. You can download this resource by going to ministryboom.com. This 5-page PDF is a discipleship alignment checklist. The Georgia Baptist Mission Board is able to provide resources like this because of gifts from Georgia Baptists to the cooperative program. For more information on this broadcast and a customized discipleship plan for your church, visit gabaptist.org/discipleship. Engage with us on your time through Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and all podcast platforms. Lastly, if you've benefited from this conversation today, please share this with a friend as we seek to help churches make